Et ma tänan, et tulite, ma saan aru, et vara ja seetõttu ei olegi väga palju rahvast. Вот, спасибо вам большое, что пришли. Вас немного, но лучшие люди города на месте, как мы знаем. Вот, к нам также сейчас присоединится телевидение, так что будет не так нам грустно. Вот, я думаю, что мы все-таки обсудим то, зачем мы собрались, потому что тема, на мой взгляд, очень интересная. И идея – это вообще продолжение предыдущего семинара, который мы делали. Он касался положения нацменьшинств. Я пригласила своих коллег, мы долго, так сказать, тянули время.
I invited here my colleagues, and it was very difficult to find common time just in calendar, and that's why we postponed a bit our meeting here. Professor Nils, I don't know what about the previous parliament compositions, but together with our Hungarian colleague, he has organized also in the European Parliament traditional groups of support. About 70 deputies belong to this group from different countries, and when we get together and discuss our problems, then we can understand that we don't have problems only in Estonia. Everybody has got problems, but these problems are different ones. And here, the leader of this group and representative of Swedish minority in Finland. I had such a funny thing when I met a Swedish person who voted for Nilsson's party. They all support the Swedish party in Finland, and when they missed about 46 votes, and they wanted to find out where are these 46 votes. I asked, why do you vote for Swedish parties? You don't have any problems. That's why we are voting for them, in order not to have problems. So our next guest, Mr. Andrejs Mamikins, deputy from Latvia to the European Parliament. They also have certain problems with national minorities, and then the next guest is a Turkish gentleman from Bulgaria. They have just small national minority, about 1 million of Turkish people in Bulgaria. If we compare with our country, then they have a bit maybe more serious problems with that minority. This was such an idea to discuss about the opportunities for the development of national minorities in the countries of European Union, and I would like to just tell the results of sociological inquiry in Sarpol, and very interesting results we got there. And to protect our own national minorities in the European Union. In the period from the 4th to the 22nd of May this year, we had a poll, just Sarpol made a survey just in the cities and also urban and rural areas, and had special questionnaires to understand about the certain issues. I'm not Eurosceptic, but I just invited Ivar Raig also, the professor from university, and he is moderate Eurosceptic person, and we met last time in the Vabariigi Kodanik special show. Yes. And just what about the European Union?
So it was highly probable 14%, rather probable 41%, not probable 31%. And people who believed that European Union is going to fall apart was the smallest percent. So actually the tendency is growing, that people believe that European Union might come apart in 5 or 10 years. The difference between Estonians and non-Estonians was quite high.
Вот мы посмотрим на эстонцев и неэстонцев. И здесь мы видим очень хорошую разницу. 53% эстонцев считают, что ЕС развалится.
So more non-Estonian people, Russian-speaking people, believed that European Union might come apart. So why are we talking about that? There are many risk factors which threaten EU according to people, and one of the reasons for that are non-fulfilled expectations of people in different areas, but as long as our subject today is national minorities, we are going to speak about the minorities. So what were the largest risks to the European Union according to people? Islamic terrorism, 47% of Estonians and 47% of non-Estonians. You can see that these are similar numbers, so not much national difference. The crisis in the Middle East and refugees crisis, 43% of Estonians and 49% of non-Estonian. Economical crisis in the Eurozone, 25% of Estonians, 35% of Russians. UK leaving the EU and appropriate political consequences.
Все это на эстонском, да, но вот Suurbritannia lahkumine, это выход Великобритании из ЕС, 25%
25% of Estonians and 18% of non-Estonians. And the most interesting question, the most interesting point is political situation and Russia's policy to its neighboring countries. So, according to Estonians, it was the risk factor number 3, 30%, and only 4% of Russians found it a threat to the EU. So you can see that Islamic terrorism was risk number 1 according to the people. So what can we conclude based on that? I think that it is all conditioned by the media that the people watch or consume. So the subject of our survey was how the EU helped to minorities before the accession to the EU.
Так вот, переступлением Эстонии в ЕС я всегда сравниваю это, знаете, со свадьбой.
Before Estonia's accession to the EU, I always compare this to a wedding when a bride has a nice dress, has her hair done and so on, but after she is married, she has to face all the difficulties of the family life. So the same is with countries accessing to international organization. And Estonia had to fulfill Copenhagen criteria, and the minorities were one of them. Those criteria were adopted in 1993. According to them, a country has to observe all democratical principles, the rights of minorities and so on, but it was everything was stipulated quite generally there. And in Estonia, a lot of informative events were held, a lot of roundtables. Many of you participated in those roundtables, but this activity quietly subsided, and when the European Commission made assessment of Estonia's activities,
тогда вы помните, это был Ван дер Стул, человек совершенно, так сказать, адекватный, который хорошо понимал наши проблемы. На мнение других органов ОБСЕ, Совета Европы и ООН.
And Max van der Stoel was quite unbiased in his assessment. So it was because of him when Estonia started different projects on integration. Many of those projects were funded by Norway. So it was because of the European Commission that the law on language was seriously modified, and several anti-discrimination measures were taken in Estonia. And very many people also got their residence permit before accession to the EU. But after Estonia became an EU member, the government took it as a victory, and there started stagnation in many of the minority-related issues, and also new version of the law of language was passed, which has a definition of minority. So according to this definition, minority member, minority person is a resident, Estonian national, a person who has connection with Estonia and has no difference from an Estonian person based on language. So a minority is someone who has Estonian nationality, Estonian citizenship. So it means that those 200,000 people who don't have Estonian passport are not minorities. So let me find the right paper. So this just increased inequality between people who are Estonian citizens and who are not Estonian citizens. For example, Estonian citizens can be elected to local self-governments, and EU citizens also can be elected to local self-government. So if you are, let's say, a citizen of the UK and you come to Estonia, and you can be elected to government body. But if you are not Estonian citizen but live here for dozens of years, you can't be elected. EU citizens can vote.
Опять же, после вступления в ЕС резко, заметно сократилось финансирование гражданского общества третьего сектора.
Also, project funding changed after accession to the EU, and even language courses, language trainings are very much underfunded by the government, and this is very difficult for a person to get a free language course. There was a case when a person who doesn't speak Estonian wrote a letter in Russian where he can learn the Estonian language. This letter was to a public organization, and he received a reply in the Estonian language saying that unfortunately we don't teach the language at the elementary level.
Отсутствие языка, естественно, мешает трудоустройству, это как бы всем понятно.
So, rhetorics of the public people changed drastically after 2007, and stigmatization also increased.
И, в общем, это такой способ стигматизации, как бы. Ну и надзор за соблюдением прав нацменьшинств стал очень поверхностным. Ну, у нас вообще с этим большие проблемы.
So why I'm talking all that? I'm saying this for the sake of my colleagues, so that they understand the context. So another problem is the Russian school. This is not possible to go to high school in Russian. And unfortunately, the level of education and level of teaching of the Estonian language in the high school is quite low. So this causes marginalization and again stigmatization. So people, young people are quite disoriented after graduating from school.
Mamikins и Татьяной Жданок подготовили и будем сейчас подавать. Она касается неграждан. Мы просим для неграждан 3 вещей.
So we ask 3 things for non-citizens: right for election to the EU, right to be elected to local self-government, and a right to be members of political parties, because this deprives them of their rights to stand for their interests. So this is the picture in Estonia, what was before the EU accession, which expectations people had, and what happened after.
Ilhan, maybe we can start with you. I mean, people more or less know here what's going on in Latvia, but to be honest, we know nothing about Bulgaria and about Turkish minority in Bulgaria. Как вы вообще справляетесь, как вы себя ощущаете, и изменилась ли ваша ситуация?
So how you manage, how your situation changed, so how EU accession influenced your countries?
All right. Tere, здравствуйте. Yana, thank you for inviting us here in Tallinn, in Estonia. Thank you for having you here. Definitely, we have many major issues in Europe. We face Brexit, we face Grexit, we face financial, economical challenges, but we face also another challenge: how to live together. How to live together, having and keeping our differences. How to unite our societies. We have such problems in Bulgaria also. We have such challenges in Bulgaria, and we try to face them and work and live, especially with younger generation in togetherness. Well, what is our story? What is Bulgarian story after 1989? After the recognition of multiculturalism in Bulgarian society and protecting of minority rights truly started only after 1989, as I mentioned, as an inseparable part of the democratization of Bulgaria and its aspiration to join the EU. These minorities are represented by the following main ethnic groups: Turks, Bulgarian Turks, almost 1 million, Roma, I would say almost 80,000, almost again 1 million, and Bulgarian, the so-called Pomaks. Pomaks are people with Bulgarian language. They speak Bulgarian language, but they are Muslim believers. Although in the fact that in 1989 Bulgaria was one of the threshold of civil war, an ethnic type that destroyed the former Yugoslavia, the country remained the only one in the Balkan region to avoid the spiral of ethnic wars. This was crucial time for our country, but also for the region, to keep the peace, stability, and to give a chance, especially to young generation, to continue to have their dreams. Of course, the dissidents, they took enormous part of this process, but also the political parties, and especially my party, we succeeded to establish the liberal political model of living together by progressing from intolerance to tolerance. The mutual need for each other was realized, and namely this togetherness is now a building block in the democratic development in the country. Since the first democratic elections held in June 1990s, when my political party emerged as the third biggest vote, together with 24 representatives in the parliament, this party played a crucial role in the Bulgarian democratization process by evolving into party defeating human rights rather than ethnic separatism. It entered the parliament as a coalition partner in 2001 elections, and then we took part in another government led by Stanishev. Continued participation of our party in the political area helped the Turkish and other minorities to protect and articulate the political and economic interests, giving further impetus to the creation of peaceful ethnic model in Bulgaria. As a result, in accordance with the new Bulgarian constitution of 1991, minorities in Bulgaria are directly protected by several instruments, like International Convention of Civil Rights Protection, Civil and Political Rights, International Convention of the Elimination of all forms of radical discrimination, and etc., etc. Bearing that in mind, the Bulgarian constitution, like those of many other European states, follows the doctrine of so-called one nation, one state. Looking through the Bulgarian constitution, it can be noticed that it didn't not place the open regulations on minorities, but the giving place to paragraph 2 of Article 36, citizens whose mother tongue is not Bulgarian shall have the right to study and to use their own language alongside the compulsory study of the Bulgarian language. It informally agrees on the existence of minorities. Similarly, as in paragraph 54 of the Constitution, the provision everyone shall have the right to avail himself of the national and universal human cultural values and to develop his own culture in accordance with ethnic self-identification, which shall be recognized and guaranteed by the law is located. In addition to that, part of the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, Bulgaria, in its statement, announced that there are a number of minorities present inside the country, and the Framework Convention will apply to them. After all, looking to daily life of main minority representatives in Bulgarian society, we should notice that Turks are well integrated, politically organized, and with very clear and well expressed self-awareness, but still they are facing many challenges and intolerance from the majority. The majority believes that Turkish community has too much political and economic power and find this situation to be intolerable. To give, for example, today Bulgaria is the only country, a full member of the European Union, where is practiced the total ban of not only mother tongue, but any language during the political campaign. For that, I and several colleagues, here we have some of them, and also some in Bulgaria from my political party was penalized with fines from the law enforcement, because during the election campaign meetings with our voters, with my voters, we have used some of our phrases in our own mother tongue. Moreover, on 20th of November 2014, we as a party called on the power holders to reconsider the ideas on taking Turkish language newscast off the air of the Bulgarian National Television and Bulgarian National Radio, which has been broadcast for 15 years now. and warned that transferring these programs to particular regions is really dangerous, and it's a first step for capsulating and separating the people. As a result, today, for the first time in 25 years history of the transition of democracy in Bulgaria, although the fact that in 1998 was adopting the Radio and Television Act, which for the first time regulated the right of minorities in my country to receive news in their mother tongue from the national electronic media, the new ruling majority takes decision to intervene in the programming policy of an independent Bulgarian media. This is the reality. Well, what is the situation concerning the Roma people? They are almost completely excluded from society. General public still perceives them in overwhelmingly negative terms and continues to reject and exclude them. This is visible in the education system, healthcare, housing, labor market, and numerous other areas. Well, Pomaks, the another minority, are tolerated as a religious minority, but any attempt to assert their different ethnic or national identity is met by furiously intolerant rejection of such claims. Our attempts from within the Pomak community to assert their identity as a different from Bulgarian majority usually led to an excessively negative and aggressive reaction from the state, institution, media, and public. To conclude, if you let me know, if you let me, despite living in a multicultural environment, the problems in my country are big. We are facing them. We are trying to overcome them. Of course, there are many things to do. First thing, in my opinion, there is a big role for civil society, because during the communist regime, but also after the communist regime, we didn't succeed really to build strong institution and strong civil society. And this is one of the major problems in my country. Big role to play from political parties, not only from one or two political parties, but from all political parties, because the integration process is not a one-way process. We need both sides. We need both hands. The third thing is really important to play from important role to play from media, and I think we'll work more in an active way together with our colleagues in Bulgaria, but also with our colleagues from European Parliament in our intergroup. Thank you for inviting me again, and I'm looking for fruitful discussion. I'll put my inputs. Thank you.
Thank you. In fact, to be honest, I have like 4 questions, but I think that we'll ask questions later. And
okay.
Now, if I would like to give floor to Andrejs Mamikin, I'm not discriminating you, Nils, but as you are the only, so to say, success story in this room, so you will be like cherry on the top. Okay. Andrei, please.
Kallid eestimaalased, mul on hea meel olla täna siin. Tere. Это все, что я выучил на эстонском языке за 20
So this is everything which I learned in the Estonian language after my 10-minute walk with Yana Toom. So thank you, Yana, for inviting me to this conference. I have to say that speaking about the minorities in Latvia, you have to think of what happened in Latvia before the World War II. So Latvia has never been a mono-ethnical society. There were Russians, Polish, Belarusians, and those people also participated in the war for independence of Latvia, and in the parliament it was officially allowed to speak in 3 languages. So apart from the Latvian language, Russian and German could be used in the parliament. But after 1991, after regaining the independence, everything was, in my opinion, an escape from that tolerant society of the 30s. So they used to say that there are our traditional minorities and there are people who came here after the Soviet occupation. And so a lot of laws which were valid before annex of the Soviet Union, so a lot of those laws were resumed the effectivity, but actually the situation did not change. For example, in the parliament, so they passed a resolution that you can only apply to the public institutions in the Latvian language. So people from villages, from all Russian villages could write in Russian in the 30s, but now this is not possible. And another thing is also the school problem. So there are schools with the language of teaching, with the Russian language of teaching, also with Belarusian language of teaching, and with and also Jewish schools. So again, new laws were passed on education and on the language of instruction. And there are very many similarities between Latvia and Estonia, and the situation of the minorities in the country and in the EU. Actually, EU has never been a union of people, but it was the union of countries. And you can think of Robert Schuman, who actually came up with this idea of the union of steel and coal. So it was an economic union, and I think this is still the major factor holding the countries together. So if something happens in the banking sector, if there are some differences in tax policy, yes, the European Commission can do something. It can punish the country in default, but this does not happen if there are some minority-related problems. And the main thing which disappointed the minorities in Latvia was that in 1991 very many different people, excuse me, it was in 2012 when they organized a referendum on recognition Russian as a second national language in Latvia, and very many people supported this idea. Yet this referendum was lost, but just for mathematical reasons. So people of Latvian nationality voted against that, and actually there are quite many Russian people who don't have a Latvian citizenship. So
русскоязычных граждан больше, чем русскоязычных неграждан. А вообще неграждан, конечно, у нас по-прежнему очень много. На начало этого года 252 тысячи человек. И, конечно, 2004 год и подготовку, и вступление Латвии в Европейский Союз, и, так сказать, период с 1995 года, когда Латвия подписала ассоциативное соглашение.
In 1995, Latvia signed the pre-accession agreement. I was a journalist at that time, and I remember the general mood. If it were required from Latvia at that time to provide a zero option for citizenship, they would agree. So they were ready for everything to access to the EU. But actually, they did not demand that. They did not say anything on the minority rights. And a lot of right things were said, but those things had no political consequences. For example, there was a requirement in the law on elections that all the candidates to posts in local self-government have to pass a language test, and there was a person who could not, a disabled person who could not speak at all, so he had to pass the language test as well. So in Latvia, very few measures were taken before accession to the EU. Also, the problem of ethnical Russians are the minority.
Белорусов и украинцев, но парадоксально, что 0,3% неграждан Латвии – это этнические латыши, которые, казалось бы, да, после принятия в прошлом году преамбулы Конституции в Латвийскую Республику.
In the Constitution of Latvia, there is a preamble saying that preservation of Latvian language and Latvian culture is the aim of the state. So, very many people living in the country are not actually covered by that statement.
Так сказать, тех, опять-таки, стандартов первой независимой республики, потому что как-то, мне кажется, наши правые политики, в особенности правые, путают две вещи. Они путают русских и коммунистов.
I think our politicians confused two things. They confused Russian people with the communists. So my wife, for example, she is a Russian person whose ancestors lived in Latvia for generations, so from the southern part of Latvia. And
часть населения статусом неграждан, то сейчас, конечно, после натурализации эти статусы абсолютно идентичны.
Today, all minorities are seen as one today. And I think probably more people are going to have Latvian citizenship, but this process is also extremely slow. And the idea of Yana Toom that you need to get a citizenship and only then you can get all the rights, well, this is still quite difficult because the majority is just a mathematical majority, so it's quite difficult to fight, to stand for your rights if you are smaller in number. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the floor is given to Nils and Torvalds, but I would like kindly request you to remind we all, Turks and Russians, face the problems. They consider us as a risk to the statehood. And so what about national minorities in Finland? What about Swedish situation?
Вот, но все-таки и обо всем остальном тоже. Спасибо.
Hyvää päivää. Здравствуйте.
Good morning. First of all, I shall tell a little, very shortly, in Russian, because I left My profession is journalist, and I left Moscow in 1995 in December, and after that I almost never practiced Russian after that. That's why maybe I don't manage speak well in Russian. As I have mentioned, my profession is journalist, and I worked as a correspondent in Moscow during Yeltsin time. I worked also in Washington during George W. Bush, and I got to after. I got retired. I am now the member of European Parliament.
That's all for the Russian part of it. Some observations about minorities and how they are treated in Europe in general. We have minorities and minorities of different kinds in all European countries. I won't go into all the details because it's not probably very interesting, but I can just take Finland as one example. Yana said that that's the only good example we have in Europe. In a way, that's actually true. But before I say that we are the good ones, I probably should say also why it happened that Finland in this respect is a nicer story than we have in most countries in Europe. For the moment being, I think we Swedish speakers in Finland, we are about 6%. In my youth, we were about 8%. Most of them living on the southern and the western coast. In Helsinki, in the backyard where I grew up, we were 40 kids born immediately after the war. I'm born more or less exactly 9 months after the ceasefire at the Russian or the Soviet-Finnish front. We were about 40 kids in the backyard. 50% spoke Swedish, 50% spoke Finnish. We usually change language sort of when we turned around. Why? And I went to a Swedish school. I became a student in Swedish. I could go to university and study in Swedish. And that has its origin in actually, we could say, in 1918. The Finnish Civil War was a very tragic story, but when it finished, on the winning side you had two influential parties, a Fennoman party, or two Fennoman parties, and a Swedish-speaking party. So the fundamental law of Finland was actually done or written after the experience of the Civil War, and that granted us a lot of rights no other minority in any other country in Europe actually could achieve. So, luckily or not, but on the graves of those who've perished during the Civil War, we built a new Finland with larger rights for minorities than in any other country. Later, we had an influx, and that goes probably to after 1991. We had an influx of Russian speakers. Well, those who experienced Russia during the 90s can probably for good reason understand that coming to Finland was slightly less problematic than being back during the Yeltsin years in Russia. We had a lot of influx of Estonian speakers. If you go to a building site in Finland, you probably will hear more Estonian than Finnish, not to speak about Swedish. For the moment, we have had during the last few years influx of people from Iraq. We have an influx of people from Somali. We have an influx for the moment being people from Syria. And all those minorities have, of course, I don't know, you should say of course, but they have lesser rights than the Swedish-speaking population because they weren't there when the decisions were made in 1918. So in the background, in every country, you have a history. And usually that history, when we speak about Europe, that history is a very tragic one. You're going to find awful, horrifying stories about minorities in every country, European countries, every European country. Even if we sometimes try to behave as if we were civilized human beings, when it comes to minorities, the European history has been a misery. And you can go anywhere. You can start with Russia or the Soviet Union. You can go to the Great Terror. You can go to other countries more civilized than Russia or more happier than Russia, and you're going to find the same patterns. We can go, for instance, to the case of Sweden. Sweden is usually the poster boy of a civilized country. But when it comes to national or language rights, Sweden has actually been not so much a poster boy. For the Finnish population, living up in the northern part of Sweden, you had very strict rules. They were not allowed to go to a Finnish-speaking school. They were not allowed to speak Finnish on the schoolyards. They were not allowed to study in their mother tongue. So you have a lot as soon as we speak about minorities, we have a lot of historical problems there. And I think the Baltic states are perfect examples of that. We also have a very troublesome history when we speak about religious minorities. In my childhood, we were very proud of making difference between Protestants and Roman Catholics and Orthodox. We had them all. The main Catholic Church was built actually for Polish officers in the Russian army about 1860. The great Orthodox Cathedral in Helsinki, you can see it when you arrive in the southern harbor, was built for Russian chinovniks during the time we were part of the Russian Empire. We had, if you look at European history, the history of Jews is especially tragic. Then you go, and it was already mentioned, if you go to Roma or other people, then it's even more tragic. Today we have a very interesting problem concerning Muslims. And we tend to speak about religious minorities with a Muslim background in fairly stupid manners. First of all, we have a long history of, also in Finland, of Muslims with a very, very generous outlook. They were the first Muslim community in Finland was established by Tatars coming from Kazan and being fur traders. Very civilized, very well educated. And nobody asked, are they Sunni or Shia, because they were Tatars. But when we speak about Sunni and Shia and other religions, I think we should be open also to the intricacies of pre-modern and modernized religions. because I think we're going to have a problem with pre-modern religions. When we speak about modernity, I think the dividing line is something in the 16th, 17th century. In Finland and in Sweden and in Germany and all over Europe, people started to read their Bible on their own, and that was strictly forbidden, and people were burned at stake for reading the Bible on their own. But that was one way of approaching modernity, to make your own decisions. During my years in Moscow, I interviewed a church leader. His name is Chaplin. He's probably not any related to the funny Chaplin, because I didn't find him very funny at all. But he was very strict on when I asked him, should a person be able to read the Bible on his own? And he said no, under no circumstances. And that's one of the dividing lines when we speak about modern religions. And that pre-modern, modern divisive line is going to be a challenge for us when we try to make a living place for Muslims today coming to Europe. So that's going to be one of the challenges. I'm going to give you one more example of the good ways of deciding. Probably one enclave in Europe where you have a very interesting solution in many respects is the Åland Islands. The Åland Islands is an enclave where you are granted a minority right, and people coming to the island are to be able to live there and to get a right to settle down there for forever. They have to accept the cultural rules of the Åland Islands. And the cultural rules of the Åland Islands were actually also established in the 1920s, when the Åland Islands were afraid of nationalistic tendencies in Finland and said, oh, these awful people, we won't join them, we will go to Sweden, we will be part of Sweden. And after long and hesitant and problematic negotiations, they were granted a special part in Finland and in Finnish history, with very, very deeply established cultural rights. But did we treat Sami people in the same way? No. So when we sometimes try to boast and say that we are the good example, the Finnish experience in regard of Sami people is a very depressing one. We gave them their first possibility to have a secondary school in their own language in the 70s. So always when you hear a Finn boasting about how nice and sweet they are to other cultures, then be slightly careful, because it's not always true. Solutions. Next week we're going to have a very interesting discussion in Strasbourg in the intergroup for traditional minorities. You could already hear the slightly ironic tone in Yana's presentation of this intergroup, because this word traditional minorities is a code word for not taking in and on board all the minorities we have, and not put on the table all the problems we have in this regard. But next week we're going to have a very interesting discussion. There will be an introduction by a originally Finnish or Swedish-Finnish scholar, Tove Skutnap-Kangas. She has been a professor at Aarhus University in Denmark for God heaven knows how long. She's happily a pensioner also today. But her first and strongest wisdom is that everybody must have a possibility to be educated in his or her mother tongue. Why? We all know that every language has different layers. If I speak to a Somali taxi driver in Helsinki, then he will say moi. I find it slightly uncultivated because I would say moi just to a good friend of mine. But the reason he uses language in the wrong way is that he'll try to show that he's my friend. But he doesn't understand the different layers of a language because he has an education which is not very good. I think there is plentiful examples of persons not able to learn a new language, if they aren't taught the first language, their native language, as the first language in which they are going to learn how different layers of language function, and they're going to learn abstract thinking. I think we have plentiful examples of people not being able to go to the university level to study just for this reason. They drop out of school in secondary school, and they are forced to take on jobs not so not so good for their future, not so demanding. So I think one of the lessons we have to learn is that we have to give some elemental human rights to everybody. And if we don't do that, then we know what's happened, because we have seen it in history before. Every time we don't live up to the lofty ideals we are preaching, we are creating problems for the future. That's sort of the end of my story.